Story 1. The Midnight Ghost. It was an ordinary night, and I was home alone, watching TV. It was close to midnight, so I decided to go to bed. Just then, the TV screen flickered, and the picture went completely black. Thinking it was a signal problem, I got up to check the connections. As I bent down to check the TV cables, I suddenly felt a chill creeping up from behind. Straightening up, I realized the temperature in the room had dropped sharply, as if someone was staring at me from behind. Shivering, I turned around but saw nothing. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I was too tired. I turned off the TV and prepared to go upstairs to bed. Just then, I heard faint footsteps upstairs, like someone was walking slowly. There was no one else in the house, and the sound sent chills down my spine. Gathering my courage, I slowly walked up the stairs, each step feeling particularly heavy. The footsteps stopped abruptly as I approached the top of the stairs, and the surroundings fell into an eerie silence. I reached the bedroom door, finding it open and the room pitch black inside. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open and turned on the light. In the light, the room was a mess, as if someone had ransacked it. Feeling uneasy, I started checking every corner of the room but found nothing unusual. As I was about to leave the room, I suddenly felt a cold breeze blow past my back. I turned around and saw a blurry figure standing by the window. It was the figure of a woman, her hair disheveled and her clothes tattered, her eyes staring straight at me. Terrified, I took a few steps back, my heart racing, almost unable to breathe. The woman slowly walked towards me, her steps light and silent, as if she were floating. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes radiated deep resentment. I shouted loudly, but my voice seemed to be muffled by something, unable to get out. I tried to run out of the room, but my feet felt like they were caught by something, unable to move. The woman got closer, and I could almost feel her breath. She walked up to me, reached out her hand, and her icy fingers touched my cheek. I felt a bone-chilling cold, as if my entire body was frozen. Her lips parted slightly, and she uttered in a low voice, "Leave this place." I mustered all my strength to break free, ran down the stairs, and fled the house. Standing outside, I looked back and saw that the figure by the window had disappeared, as if it had never been there. I ran to my neighbor's house, told them what had happened, and they decided to help me check the house. The neighbors and I went back to my house, carefully checking every room, but everything seemed normal. There was no sign of anyone breaking in. I began to wonder if I was just too tired and had hallucinated, but the fear in my heart wouldn't go away. A few days later, I noticed strange occurrences in my daily life. Every midnight, I would hear faint footsteps upstairs, as if someone was wandering around. Whenever I tried to go upstairs to check, the sound would stop, but the feeling of being watched never went away. One night, I decided to investigate thoroughly. I installed cameras around the house, hoping to capture any abnormal phenomena. The next morning, I eagerly checked the footage, but when I saw the images, my heart seemed to stop beating. In the footage, I could clearly see a blurry figure wandering around the room. Her movements were slow and heavy, each step as if dragging something weighty. Even more terrifying, she stayed by my bed for a long time, looking down at me as I slept. I immediately called the medium and told her about my experience. She told me that the woman might be a restless spirit who had suffered great pain and misfortune in her lifetime. To help her find peace, we needed to find her relics and hold a ceremony to appease her. Following the medium's instructions, I started searching the house for anything that might belong to the woman. After several days of searching, I found an old box in a corner of the attic. Inside the box were some worn-out clothes and a yellowed photo. The photo showed a family with the house in the background. The medium, after seeing the photo, told me that the woman might have been the lady of the house, who had met with misfortune one night and whose soul had never found peace. To help her, we decided to hold a ceremony under the old tree shown in the photo. On a stormy night, we went to the old tree. The medium began chanting incantations, and I placed the box and photo by the tree roots. Suddenly, a strong wind blew, rustling the leaves, and a blurry figure appeared before us. She stood there, her eyes filled with sorrow and despair. The medium continued chanting, and the woman gradually became transparent, finally disappearing into the wind. As she vanished, the wind stopped, and the surroundings returned to calm. The medium told me that her soul had finally found peace. I was immensely grateful, and the fear in my heart gradually dissipated. Although the experience left me apprehensive, I knew that some souls need our help to find true tranquility. A few months later, I moved out of that house, but the experience stayed with me forever. Occasionally, at midnight, I would think of that woman, her gaze seemingly still watching me in the darkness. Story 2. The Vanished Classmate. In our class, there was a student named John. He was a quiet and introverted boy who didn't interact much with others. We didn't know much about him, only that he preferred to be alone. Recently, his behavior had become increasingly odd. He often talked to himself and looked very anxious. One day, John suddenly didn't come to school. At first, we thought he was sick, but after a few days, he still didn't show up. The teacher tried to contact his family, but the phone kept going unanswered. A few days later, we learned that John had gone missing. His disappearance threw the entire school into panic. Everyone speculated about his whereabouts. Some said he had been kidnapped. Others said he had run away to another place. But I felt there was more to the story. So, a few friends and I decided to visit his house. It was an old apartment building, and John's home was on the 4th floor. We walked up the stairs and knocked on his door, but there was no answer. Just as we were about to leave, I noticed a letter slipped through the door crack. It read, "Help me." We were very surprised and quickly opened the envelope. The letter said, "I am trapped here. Please help me escape. Come to the old church behind the school at midnight. I will be waiting for you there." We looked at each other and decided to follow the letter's instructions. At midnight, we quietly arrived at the old church behind the school. It was a long abandoned building and looked particularly eerie. We pushed open the heavy wooden door and walked into the church, which was pitch dark inside, with only a few beams of moonlight shining through the broken windows. Suddenly, we heard a whispering sound. We followed the sound and found John sitting in a corner of the church, his face pale and his eyes vacant. Seeing us, he said excitedly, "Thank you for coming. I am trapped here and cannot escape." We asked him what had happened, and he told us that he had seen a strange shadow in his house and followed it to this place, but then he could never leave. He had tried many times, but each time he was blocked by an invisible force. As we were discussing how to help him escape, footsteps suddenly echoed through the church. A tall, dark shadow appeared in front of us, exuding a sinister aura. We were too scared to move, and the shadow slowly approached John. John screamed for help, but we were also trapped by the force and couldn't move. The shadow dragged John into a dark corner, and his screams gradually faded away, leaving us frozen in place, filled with fear and helplessness. Shortly after, the shadow disappeared, and the church returned to silence. We could finally move, but John was gone. We didn't dare stay any longer, and quickly fled the church. Back home, we were still shaken and decided to tell the teacher and police the next day. The next day, we brought the teacher and police to the old church, but found nothing, not even a trace of John. The police thought we were making up a story, but we knew that everything that happened last night was real. Since then, John never appeared again. Despite our efforts to find his whereabouts, there was no result. Whenever it was late at night, I would always recall the terrifying scene I saw in the church, filled with endless questions and fear. Years later, we moved away from that town, but the experience remained etched in my memory. Every midnight, I could hear those faint footsteps, as if John's soul was still searching for a way out. Story 3: The Haunting Melody. Lisa was a young musician whose life revolved almost entirely around music. She had shown incredible musical talent since she was a child, mastering the piano, violin, and guitar with ease. Her dream was to become a world-renowned musician, and she worked tirelessly towards this goal. One day, Lisa received an anonymous letter inviting her to perform a solo concert at an old mansion in the suburbs. The letter said it was a private concert for a mysterious noble, and if she performed well, she would be handsomely rewarded. Lisa was both excited and curious about this opportunity, so she decided to accept the invitation. The mansion was nestled deep in a secluded forest, looking very old and dilapidated. When Lisa arrived, it was already late, and the entire mansion was shrouded in an eerie atmosphere. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and walked into the dimly lit hall. The hall was empty, with only some old furniture and dusty musical instruments. Lisa hesitated for a moment, but she decided to continue. She walked to the center of the hall and found an old piano. Although the piano looked very worn out, she couldn't resist sitting down and starting to play. As soon as her fingers touched the keys, a chill ran down her spine. She looked up and saw a tall figure standing behind her, dressed in a black robe with a blurred face. Startled, Lisa stopped playing. The figure slowly approached her and said in a deep voice, "Welcome, Lisa. We have been waiting for you for a long time." Lisa felt a strong surge of fear, but she forced herself to stay calm. She asked, "Who are you? Why did you invite me here?" The figure did not answer, merely pointing to the piano, indicating for her to continue playing. Lisa took a deep breath and began to play a beautiful melody. As the music flowed, she felt the atmosphere around her grow increasingly eerie. Her vision became blurred, and she seemed to see countless shadowy figures moving around her. Some of the figures were old nobles, while others were dressed in tattered clothes like servants, all with expressions of pain and despair on their faces. Lisa's heart raced, and she wanted to stop playing, but her fingers seemed to have a mind of their own, continuing to dance across the keys. Whispers filled her ears, telling her ancient secrets and curses. She gradually realized that this mansion held a terrible secret, and she seemed to be getting entangled in it. Suddenly, the music stopped, and the entire hall fell into a dead silence. The shadowy figure reappeared before her and coldly said, "You have completed your mission. Now, you will become part of us, never able to leave." Desperately looking around, she suddenly noticed an old mirror standing in the corner of the hall. In the mirror, she saw her own reflection, but the eyes in the reflection were filled with despair and fear. She realized that the reflection in the mirror was not herself, but a soul trapped in the mansion. Lisa trembled with fear and shouted, "No, I don't want to be part of you. Let me go." But her voice seemed to be swallowed, echoing in the empty hall without any response. Lisa tried desperately to run, but her feet felt like they were nailed to the ground, unable to move. The shadowy figure slowly approached her, extending a cold hand to grab her shoulder. Lisa felt a bone-chilling cold spread from her shoulder throughout her body, and her consciousness began to fade. She heard the whispers growing louder and clearer, as if countless souls were telling her about their pain and despair. Her vision blurred, and everything before her became indistinct. Finally, she felt her soul being pulled out of her body and plunged into endless darkness. The next morning, Lisa's friends discovered that she was missing. They searched the entire mansion, but couldn't find any trace of her. The police conducted an investigation but found nothing. It was as if Lisa had vanished from the face of the earth. Years later, the mansion was abandoned once again, becoming a desolate ruin. According to legend, some people had heard beautiful yet eerie music coming from the mansion at night, and others had seen a figure dressed in a black robe wandering inside. People said that Lisa's soul was still trapped in the mansion, unable to find peace. Every nightfall, her soul would play that haunting melody in the mansion, telling the world about her pain and despair. Story 4. The Whispering Shadows. Emily was a young girl who had just moved to the small town. She loved exploring new places, especially the old buildings in this town. There was an abandoned library in the town, and many people said it was haunted, so no one dared to go near it. After hearing these rumors, Emily became even more curious and decided to explore it. On a cloudy afternoon, Emily brought a flashlight and a notebook and quietly arrived at the front of the library. The library's door was already dilapidated, but she managed to push it open and walked in. It was pitch black inside, with a musty smell in the air. She turned on her flashlight and began to look around. The shelves in the library were covered in dust, and many of the books were moldy and damaged. Emily slowly walked deeper into the library and found an old diary on a desk. She picked it up curiously and found the text inside blurred, but she could barely make out a few lines. The shadows are whispering. They are waiting for a new soul. Emily felt a chill run through her. She put down the diary and prepared to leave. However, at that moment, she heard low whispers, as if countless people were whispering in her ears. Her flashlight started to flicker, and the shadows around her seemed to wriggle and move closer. She looked around in terror but saw no one. The whispers grew louder and clearer, as if calling out to her. She felt an invisible force tugging at her consciousness, causing her to lose her grip on reality. She struggled to stay awake, but the power of the shadows grew stronger. Her vision blurred, and everything in front of her started to spin. Suddenly, her flashlight went out completely. She was plunged into darkness, and the whispers around her grew louder and more chaotic. Her heart raced, and she felt an unprecedented fear. She tried to scream, but her voice seemed swallowed up, unable to make a sound. In the darkness, she felt something approaching her. She tried to open her eyes wide, but she couldn't see anything. The whispers surrounded her ears, and she could almost make out what they were saying. "We are waiting for you to join us." Emily felt a wave of dizziness, and her body began to grow cold, as if her life force was being drained away. Her consciousness gradually blurred, as if sinking into the darkness. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, her flashlight suddenly came back on. She woke up abruptly and found herself still standing in the library. She panted heavily, still in shock. The shadows seemed to have retreated, but the whispers still echoed in her ears. Knowing she couldn't stay any longer, she quickly turned and rushed out of the library. Back home, Emily was still shaken. She told her friends about her experience, but no one believed her story. She decided never to go back to that library, but the whispers seemed to linger. Whenever it was late at night, she could always hear those whispers. A few days later, Emily discovered that her flashlight had become strange since the exploration. No matter where she went, the light of the flashlight would flicker, as if an invisible force was interfering. She even felt that sometimes the light of the flashlight would become a guide, leading her to unknown places. One night, the flashlight's light suddenly brightened, illuminating her room. She was surprised to find that the light seemed to be guiding her in a specific direction. She hesitated for a moment but finally decided to follow the light and see where it would lead her. She picked up the flashlight and followed the light out of her room, onto a path she had never seen before. She felt like she was being guided by an invisible force, unable to resist. She walked for a long time, and finally arrived at an old cemetery. The cemetery was eerie, with gravestones covered in moss and vines. She walked to a particularly large gravestone and found a name carved on it, Anna. She felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. As if the name was not unfamiliar to her, she started digging the soil in front of the gravestone, filled with fear and doubt. When she dug to a certain depth, she found a diary. She opened the diary and it was filled with Anna's story. Anna was also a girl who loved exploring, but she was trapped by the shadows while exploring the library and could never leave. Emily finally understood that Anna's soul had been looking for someone to replace her so she could be freed. And now Anna had found Emily. She felt a wave of despair, knowing she couldn't escape this fate. Her flashlight's light started flickering again, and the whispers in her ears grew clearer. She felt a powerful force tugging at her soul, making her gradually lose control of her body. She struggled, but to no avail. In the end, her consciousness gradually blurred, and her body seemed to be enveloped by a dark force. From that day on, Emily was never seen again. People said that late at night, they could still hear whispers coming from the library as if the souls were whispering. And that library became the new forbidden place in the town.